What's going on, guys? This is X. Today we're here to take a look at all the sets that released for Cardfight Vanguard in the past year and give my rankings on them. This is probably going to be interesting because there actually was a really big amount of sets. In fact, so much I did this video prior and then realized I was still missing stuff. It's actually crazy because it's like some I forget, or it's like, wait, that released this year? Again, just a lot of sets. We got like 14. So, we're gonna start with the one on the screen, which is Token Rambo Online. I mean, let's be honest, you probably forgot this set existed too. Was just kind of mediocre at best when it released in Japan, and finally came over here, and no one cared. Just to be honest, no one really cared. It came out way too late for any potential meta relevancy, which is going to be like a big issue for a lot of these collab sets. Its only saving grace right now is that it's getting a second wave, and it has actual premium applications thanks to being the first collab all the way back in GR. So that's pretty much the only reason you would go into this set. But outside that, there's nothing really there. That's just kind of disappointing. I wish every time Token Rambo just actually got something, it got something really cool instead of just stop being mediocre for so long. And then when it finally got its actually cool stuff, they didn't bring it over. Token Rambo's just cursed. That's just kind of it. If we go number 14, number 13 is unfortunately also regular Ragnarok. This was a set I was really interested in because, hey, it was going to be our first collab set that was also a simultaneous release, and probably one of the first Vanguard sets as a simultaneous release overall. So it had, some pretty interesting things to get me hyped. And I think, when it released, it had some hype behind it in Japan. The unfortunate thing is, over here in the West, when it dropped, it was 3 months behind because it got delayed along with another set we'll talk about later. But it's just like, it's just unfortunate. I understand why it was some COVID protocol and whatnot, but even then, considering when it did drop, the set had probably the worst amount of quality assurance in the entire year. Was crazy. I mean, I wish I could pull up the legendary underneath the card's race, which is just it's just so disappointing how this set just kind of didn't really do anything in the meta that much. And then when it finally dropped, it dropped negating its biggest reason for wanting it, which is that it was going to be a simultaneous release, which is something I wish Vanguard would do going forward at sometimes, right? Just, that's one thing that could help. When not, it just became a disappointment. I just feel bad they did it dirty. Yeah, this is gonna be a controversial one. Number 12 on the list, straight up the Will Dress trial decks. I don't like I don't like the execution of these trial decks. I like the idea of what they were trying to be, which was a way for people to get into the game and learn the game in a much more comfortable manner, right? The whole point was, hey, you got the main deck, which is, had the right line, which taught you the basics of the game, certain cards that taught you how boosting or skills worked, and then you put them in with the power pack. But there were really three major issues with it, which was one, the version that came in English as opposed to what happened in Japan was different. First off, Japan actually got a pack of sleeves with their stuff. Meanwhile, we didn't get that. We got the Elementaria Sanctitude, which, I guess for a lot of people it's like, yeah, that was a better trade, right? Some people don't want anime sleeves. Some people rather just have actual cards. That's cool, but to be fair, it felt like it also just changed the actual value of the decks themselves, and it just didn't feel right, At least with the sleeves, you could be like, oh, you get a big bonus. And I think if you were able to put both in there, I don't think there's any problem. I'd say probably a better product. I'd probably put it higher if it had both the sleeves and the Elementaria Sanctitude in it, but it just didn't work out that way. As for the actual like big issue, two other issues, excuse me. Firstly, the power pack only came with two of the obvious like best generic card in that pack, meaning you now had to get two. I think also another issue with power pack is you only got one of the right line, and some people actually want to experiment with multiple copies of cards in the right line for whatever reason. I'm not gonna judge, but hey. So that's another issue. So multiple people had to get the cards from the deck, being that people who actually want to become new to the game actually just didn't have enough supply. So that kind of sucks. And then my final issue is kind of the biggest one. The main boss used in these sets are lies. The whole point of this was to be, oh hey, here's a watered down version of the main boss unit of the whole deck's profile playstyle, only for it to then be like, oh, but also there's a better version in the upcoming booster sets that you should probably go get and buy, you know, because they're going to be real better, and those cards end up being like $10-$20 triple rare. So basically the whole value of the deck was just thrown away, and it's not really great. It's kind of scummy. Like if you compare it to the original start decks that released, all 6 of them, heck, even a trial deck of Bermuda Triangle or Lyrical Monsterio, excuse me, it just had much more value, and you know, it's a smaller price. Like you got the cards, you got the right line, you got copies of your main boss that was actually the boss of the deck for an actual decent price of at least $5. And you know, it's hard to really compete with that, but even with that, it still feels like you should just put those bosses in the booster into the actual like trial deck. Instead, you're just bloating up the booster sets with all these unnecessary triple rares. They shouldn't have been there. Like the fact that Drajul had to wait so long for its actual card, and it still ain't do nothing. That's kind of sad. That's crazy. So I just don't like these sets, really. It's just unfortunate. All right, so next we've got the Festival Collection 2022. Man, these sets are just not great. These sets are just not good. Like they're pretty much just there to be like getting vanity rarities of cards you already wanted. This one was slightly different in fact that it had some Sakura support combined with some other cards, other like generic support, and then you also got Orphis and Zorga's new versions, which was kind of cool, but no one bought it, so they all became like $30 cards for no reason. Like, yeah, the set is just completely like a waste of time. Where I feel like now, with the more and more Vanguard gets more expensive with the crazy things, and I'll talk about more in a second, I think you should just from now on just reformat these into just reprint sets for standard. It's at this point where I just feel like there's nothing really new you could do, and there's no real selling point outside these vanity rarities that just aren't really going to sell the set, because people know how good Vanguard cards should be and can be. So if there's nothing to sell, there's nothing really that matters. And then again, like you put in 2 cards that people actually wanted into the set, and it's just like, but no one else wanted the set. It's just it baffles me that this set released in the way it did. And I think just either scrap it or retool it into a reprint set every year. Just do it. It's actually kind of a waste of space in its current iteration. Next, when I originally did the list, I forgot the set existed. Lyrical Monsterio 2, it's just not great. It is a set that doesn't really support its old ride lines effectively, and then when you get to the 2 new ride lines, Herminia and Fortia, I was to call her waifu overlord, but that's too cringe. That's cringe. I even said that. Oh my goodness. But the point is, Fortia was not great, but her engine was, which also went into the fact that they also created a tier 1 deck in Kairi, because you could use the friend engine because it was just that generic. Melty is a $20 plus triple rare for a reason, and you actually created a tier 1 deck but it wasn't with Fortia. And that's disappointing because you would think that, you know, all these good cards would make Fortia good, right? And Fortia then just means you have to jump through extra hoops when Kyrie's just like, oh, it just bounced through stuff for free. Let's go. Unfortunate, and Herminia and Powerful, just not great either. Like, Powerful is straight up a janky mechanic. And I don't think Herminia is strong enough as a card to justify the actual, like, to justify the amount of hoops you have to jump through to actually make the deck work, which is completely unfortunate. It's just sad there. So pretty much the whole set's just kind of forgettable. It's not terrible. Again, Kyrie became one of the best decks released from it, but it doesn't really do much. And it's sad because I really wish that some of these actual set one lines actually got a valuable support wave, when Lyrical 3 basically just like replaces them all anyway. Next on the list, DBT05. DBT05 is strong now, but back on release, this set was actually just like, outside of Degria and Tamayura and Overlord, yeah, there's none really important to the set, right? You know, we think of Ava as like one of the best decks in the format now, but that's because you got a promo, set 6 support, and another wave in DBT08. But if we look at it face here, it was actually just pretty terrible. It was fun, but still terrible. Like, you basically didn't activate turn 4 and whatnot. Then you look at the other things. Chaos was just a hot mess. Didn't really have any support that really gave it anything it needs. And then you got also Rora. Rora was cool, but didn't really have. Rora was cool, but it wasn't like impactful. You know, it's like, why would I play this when I got Magnolia right there, or Flagberg, or literally anything else? You know, the problem with this set is it was saved by promos. But even then, like, that's not indicative of the actual set's quality. And that's the part that just makes me go, yeah, no, the set is kind of really low on the list, straight up. Otherwise, you know, I'd say, like, if you look at a set that aged fantastically, I'd say this is probably one of the ones that aged well. But if you're going on release, this was terrible. Next, I don't know if I want to put this here, but I'm pretty sure I want to talk about it. Lyrical 3, Sometime Memories, pretty alright set. It was part of the DBT06, in which it reprinted all the cards that are porn, like triggers. I don't think it reprinted triggers, but I think it reprinted the PGs and the heals. It reprinted vanilla, excuse me. It reprinted PGs and over triggers and the vanilla triggers. So that's also good. Then it also gave us 6 raw lines. Each of them have a unique play styles. What also has some generic stuff for older stuff, which is nice. And then, you know, obviously Michu, Herminia, you know, they came out as stronger decks. You know, there's also a 50 plus triple rare that apparently in Japan people are literally having to trade whole decks for just to get, which is crazy. So, you know, I say this set definitely had more value. Unfortunately, in English, it's now marred by the fact that it is known as the NFT set. Oh god, I still want to think about that. Let's just get off this now so I don't have to think about it. Good set. Let's move on. Next, this is gonna be a surprise to a lot of people. I think Shaman King is probably one of the top half of the sets this year, and more so the English version, which is Shaman King Volume 1 and 2, combined together into a super set, which, you know, helps take off all the fluff, means that you get both waves of support at the same time. You're not having to work about old support. You all get it at the same time. I think this is actually really good, and it still had meta relevance all throughout the year for the most part. Obviously, it did kind of fall off a bit, but, you know, people still played it, and it still had value. Like, you still had Taoren, you still had you still had, you know, some topping lists here and there in Japan are actually playing this. So that's, you know, I think overall, I think Shaman King is the quintessential collab set, in which it's good, but it's not game breaking. looking at you, Monster Strike. Like, it's actually a really good, solid deck that just a solid nation, a solid clan, whatever you want to call it, and it's a strong collab that didn't overstep its boundaries or overstay its welcome. I think it's pretty good. Next would be Premium Pre-Collection 2022. Set had some crazy cards. Once again, this is Premium Collection. They always have crazy cards. But I also think it also came with a lot more like general use cards. It lowered the crazed power, but didn't really like it. More so, it balanced out the power, I guess you could say, for certain decks. And it was always a fun time, like watching as decks get new ways or different like mechanics right now. So that's always good. Also, G guards came back. Thank you. Please print more. We need more. We need more G guards. We need more any defensive options in premium that can make moves right there. So I say Premium Collection 2022. Probably the most balanced, I guess you could say, of the premium collections. You know, I know everyone's still upset over Narukami, but hey, you know what? We will take this more times than any of those other insane premium collections that release cards that literally that are still on the ban list to this day. Clan Collection Volumes 5 and 6. Pretty alright. I think they're pretty solid. Obviously, 5 and 6 release Steam Maidens, which is a tier, you know, arguably a tier 0 deck in the format, which, you know, that's a problem. But, you know, outside of that, I think there's also some pretty cool stuff too. You know, I think Lenios actually is starting to see a lot more play now. I think I forgot else was in this set. But I think there's like some also, I think really, but honestly, I think there's like a lot of cool things that just, you know, if the Steam Maidens got hit somewhat, I think would still see a bit more play now, since it would like actually open up the floodgates for more decks to come and play. Some old decks got buffs, etc, etc. So I think 5 and 6 are pretty nice. And next is Raging Flames Against Emerald Storm. This set just released, and yeah, I think really it's a pretty cool set. It also reprints the effects triggers for standard. You know, we got a bump up compared to Japan, which is, you know, always really nice when we get something better in Japan. But you know, really this has one thing, and it is Uperk. Uperk is easily the strongest set that came out of the set, and you know, a lot of like cool decent stuff too, and probably some other stuff that actually has I'm trying to say has potential. I said the P word, but I think overall could always, you know, become better over time. So that's my thing. I think Emerald Storm is cool now. I think it come better, you know, when 9 and 10 drop. I think Volume 3 and Volume 4 for Reclaim Collection are just solid. There's a lot of like really stronger, there's a lot of like interesting decks that popped up. You know, everyone got their reverse units, you know, everyone got some cool stuff. There's a lot of cool general stuff that just really got a lot of support, and you know, and it definitely isn't worse than Volume 1 and 2 at the very least. I know there's some really, really bad duds in here. I still hate that stupid Kakai's reverse. But outside of that, I think there's a lot of solid cards here, and also a lot of solid support for all these decks. So, you know, this also kind of can flux between these three right here. Actually can just like shift whatever way you say. Say if you want to do, you know, Emerald Storms 5, have volumes 3, 4, and 5 and 6 be 3rd and 4th respectively. You know, you can do that too. I think that's also fine. As for number 2, Blazing Dragon Reborn. Blazing Dragon Reborn is the set that reprinted all the PGs and over triggers. You know, too much negativity for the over triggers than anything, but you know, hey, as long as they're here, we still need them actually available. Really cool. And then actually had the pretty balanced stuff. It was a very balanced set, gave a lot of support for new decks, gave support for old decks that are actually pretty good. You know, I think pretty set that will also age gracefully with time, so we just have to wait and see. And that leads to the number 1 set, which is Awakening Chakrabarti, the set that started the trend of the 15 plus double rare, 15 plus triple rares in a set, which depending on who you ask, is good or terrible. I think we could just look at TCG Player and see, but also had a lot of powerful cards. This is probably the strongest set of the entire year, right? You had Mahar Nirvana come up, you had Prison come up, you had Magnolia come up, you had obviously Inlet Pulse and what's his name, the DI grade 1 the Dark States grade 1 that soul charges and needs a lot of power, for generic cards. You had a big influx of power that that didn't like go crazy despite how things could have seemed, right? It ended up just kind of being more balanced than usual, which is actually nice, right? The power creep wasn't as insane as everyone thought it was going to be, which is pretty nice, right? Especially since they added grade 4s or triple drive. It just kind of ended up balancing out eventually, but it did, so that's pretty much it. So that's my base ranking of all the sets that released this year. What do you guys think? Do you think I'm close to what it should be? What would you actually like put these sets on? Like, what would you say would be the best set, the worst set? What would you rank yourselves personally on these sets? I don't know. So please leave that in the comments. And if you like this TCG content, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.